I mean, I guess you can, I don't think that would actually technically fit under what town management, and this is outlined. So I think in justifying to Jen certain ratings, I think we do have to use the framework that's there, and expending an opportunity to spend money in a certain area after the budget. I'm with you.
Where's my there?
If one of you wants to get started, I can grab the phone afterwards. Thank you. Right here, sir.
Yeah, do you want to get started?
Oh, sure.
You can be up first. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the public speaking rules, you have 3 minutes. It's timed. It'll go off.
3?
Yep,
Who's keeping time?
me.
Nice.
This little white timer is more
Be
accurately.
quicker than that.
All right, you can start.
Good evening. I'm Mike Lipp. I'm a substitute teacher here for the school district. I'm here to urge support for Mr. Mertz's amendment to the MMSD 2018-19 budget regarding the pay for long-term substitute teaching assignments. Some of you know that I taught chemistry for 35 years, was science department chair at West High School, spent my last 6 years working for the district as West's athletic director. Now, since retiring in 2015, I've been a substitute teacher for the district. I mostly work as a middle school special ed teacher. I consider it a form of payback for the relatively easy career I had working with chemistry students and in athletic director. I've observed that substitute teachers fall into 3 main groups. Retired educators like myself who are looking for part-time work on a daily basis. I don't grade papers. I don't create curriculum. I was in 6th grade science today at Cherokee. First hour was a little tough. Second and third hour were smoother. Okay? I was teaching about how much sunlight there is each month versus darkness and making graphs of that. Talking about how weather, why do we have seasons? Second group of substitute teachers are young educators trying to get started in the career, starting in a career in this noble profession. I myself spent my first year back in the early 70s as a sub for a year until I attained a position. Third group are veteran substitutes who have chosen this as their career. They work every day. Sometimes they work 1 day, sometimes 2 days, sometimes they work several weeks, sometimes a month. When they're working more than 1 day, typically they are creating curriculum, they are grading papers, they're doing more than I do as a daily sub. The district used to have a 5-step salary schedule for subs, which rewarded subs for longevity in this district. But as you're aware, Act 10 allowed the district to reduce that to a single daily rate we now have. We also have a rate known as long-term substitute teacher pay rate that applies to subs who work for 7 or more consecutive teaching days for the same regular teacher. This rate is what Mr. Mertz's budget amendment is about. Okay? The per diem pay for subs this year is $157.27. That's a decent enough wage where I'm happy working my daily work. I was at Cherokee today. I'll be at Toki on Wednesday. I don't work on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I swim. I tell the kids, you can't look this beautiful unless you're in the pool. You got to joke with the middle schoolers, James. Okay? Because the district's having trouble hiring new teachers, as the base pay in some of the suburban districts improved, it was determined that the base pay for regular teachers' salary schedule needed to be increased without overspending the annual budget, which was tricky because we had lots of people in the veteran area, so if you bump the starting pay too much, it filters through. That's 3 minutes?
It's 3
I'm
minutes.
done? Holy buckets. All right. So I want to urge support for Mr. Mertz's amendment because long-term subs do a lot more than do daily subs. Okay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, Cindy?
My name is Cindy Reitze. I worked as a professional substitute teacher in the Madison School District for 28 years. Substitute teaching is my full-time real job during the school year, and I work every day. I'm here to support TJ Mertz's proposal to raise substitute teacher long-term pay from the current $185.17 to $201.47 per day, which the board in Madison School District originally supported, then rescinded. Substitute long-term pay has not kept pace with the cost of living. Since 2010, the long-term pay increased only 4.2%, while the cost of living has increased more than 15% over the same period. Long-term pay was initially based on the starting teacher salary, but has remained frozen at level 4 for over a decade. First-year teachers now begin at level 8. The proposal that the board agreed to would have set the base at level 6. We're asking you to keep that agreement. Substitute teachers are no longer paid commensurate to their experience. A substitute teacher 1 day out of college is paid the exact same amount as a substitute teacher with 28 years of experience. Prior to Act 10, substitute teachers received longevity increases. Also, at the current rate, any long-term assignment that is less than full-time actually pays less than the full-time daily rate, is much more work. For example, an 80% long-term pays $148.14 per day, which is $9 less than the daily rate. Essentially, you're getting paid less to do more, take home free overtime, out-of-contract work, like grading papers, lesson planning, communication with parents. For many, it doesn't make financial sense to pick up anything less than 100% long-term, and that leaves the district short of teachers. The Madison School District doesn't have enough boots on the ground, and many schools are short subs of all kinds. Within the last 3 weeks alone, substitute teachers received notifications of the following long-term assignments: a full-time middle school library media specialist, a full-time high school Spanish teacher, a full-time high school family and consumer ed teacher, which has not been filled 8 weeks into the term, a 70% high school PE teacher, a 50% elementary music teacher. I also understand that La Follette was so short of substitute teachers early in October that Doyle staff had to go there to help out. I sincerely hope it was an empathic experience to walk in our boots. Another high school informed its staff that they could no longer take field trips on Fridays since there weren't enough subs to cover teacher absences. Substitute teaching is getting more difficult with weaker, fewer, overstretched behavioral supports, reduced staffing, and a wide range of unpredictable behavior from students. All these factors only exacerbate current shortages of substitute teachers and retaining professional substitute teachers with experience in the long run. Please honor your original proposal of $210.47 for substitute long-term pay, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Cindy. Joanne, do you want to speak? Do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm sorry?
Joanne.
Yes.
Dean wants me to say it louder.
Okay,
I
yeah.
always
Hi.
speak away from him. So.
I'm Joanne, Joanne Youngke. And most of you know me by now. I'm as mom to Lydia, junior at Memorial, and Miriam in 8th grade at Jefferson. And I'm speaking to the agenda item on the budget update as it relates to special education staffing. Subject near and dear to me, as Miriam's educational needs are staff intensive. And when the staff get stretched too thin, things get really dicey. But I also hear from parents at other schools about their staff-related struggles, and I hear from staff too. And I was at the board meeting in October a year ago where several CC teachers spoke just devastatingly about the conditions in which they were trying to keep their students safe and let alone educate them as challenges with insufficient staffing. And I spoke and other parents did it as well, and at that meeting the board voted unanimously to spend an additional $1 million on special education staffing. It hardly seemed like enough. You divide it up among 50 schools, that's less than one SEA apiece, but it was unanimous, and it was deeply welcome. And then I understand it wasn't spent, and I'm here to learn more about that. When I tried to contact one of the teachers who spoke so movingly, some months later, she wasn't with the district anymore and was enjoying a new start in another district where the needs of her students were better resourced. Being on the verge of departure makes it easier for a teacher to speak up, I've found. Other teachers tell me stories that they will not bring to the school board. And these are not my daughter's teachers, they're not even at her school necessarily. But like the CC teacher who told me in February about trying to patch together staffing schedules out of insufficient numbers of special education assistants, only to have yet one more leave and to have to try to patch things together with even less. Or the teacher who told me this fall what parents around the district know all too well. There are IEPs that are not being followed, and it's just it's just not happening. And these are just a couple of the teachers that you as a board will not hear from. They are careful with their livelihoods, but they and their students are struggling. And there are many, many parents you won't be hearing from either. There are all sorts of reasons for that. But we owe them. We owe our staff, we owe our students and our families the resources they need to do the jobs we hired them to do and to give our kids the educations they deserve to have. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. That concludes our public statements for this evening. The next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from March 12th. Is that right? All right, we're approving minutes from March 12th. Imad, thank you. Imad, your advisory vote.
I'll abstain.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes 7-0. So today's meeting is split into kind of two parts. The first part is focused on school safety. So Jen, I don't know who you want to have join us at the table. There's a variety of folks in the room that are relevant in this topic, so.
Yeah, thank you.
And then this piece, hopefully we can be a little bit brief on. It is very much just an update. We will have another opportunity to discuss later this year, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And then the majority of the meeting will be focused on the budget for the second half.
That's right. So Karen, Chad, Joe, and Matt. Matt, are you joining us for this part? I think so. Yeah, come on up. Are members of our safety, our larger safety team, and they'll be providing the update. To Kate's point,
Brief.
take it brief.
I have a child with pneumonia, so I would appreciate truly brief.
And this is just an update on progress. There's a lot happening, so it is a real challenge to be brief. Just so many strands of our safety work in process right now. And in November, just a month from now, we're going to be giving a more substantive update on school safety plans, which you will be approving a little bit later this year. So I'll go ahead and pass it right over to Karen, who's going to kick it off. Well, yeah, let's dive in.
So thank you. So glad to be here tonight. It's near and dear to my heart. It's always been keeping schools safe. So let's just get started with people that are with me today. So Matt Bell, Joe Ballas, and Chad Weezy, along with others that participate in our safety and security district team members, have been committed to this work since this past previous year. Okay. I didn't say I had the technical skills either. Okay, so we're on a mission to close the gaps at the opportunity. You've seen this before, and definitely making sure that there's a balance between safe and supportive environments that we provide for our students. I do want to just, we state the policy very well that you passed in June around the physical well-being of every student, visitor, and employee will be a primary consideration in every school activity, including the designing of facilities, the planning of school functions, the establishment of emergency preparedness plans, or the performance of a task. All employees of the Madison School District must accept responsibility for the safety of all students and for each other in the conduct of their duties. And that is well stated in our policy. And it's our work as a team to make sure that they have the tools and resources and training to do so. So that we're committed to that work. Today, we just want to provide an update on the progress since June, and also to preview next steps, including the board approval that Jen talked about with the school safety plans in November. And also provide you some opportunity to have some questions or clarifications that you might need moving forward. As a reminder, when we last met in June, we identified implications shared with you related to Act 143, and those are specifically around school safety plans and school assessments that needed to be completed, to the mandatory reporting requirement that we needed to implement at the beginning of this year. So we shared that, and other things that are in Act 143. We shared with you assessing the facilities, also policies, reviewing policies, 2 of them in particular that you reviewed and put forth. And we also reviewed practices and procedures of our current state of how we go about doing things in our schools. We completed 2 DOJ applications for grants, as well as a federal grant. So that 3 grants, that was a lot of work, but we're very proud to know that that has been moved forth, and we were awarded those 3 grants. We shared recommendations for facilities improvement, especially for interior and exterior locks, cameras, and other stuff, and training and assessments for sure. Okay. So going into this summer, and with a lot of things that were coming our way, especially in the state, and also with great suggestions from the community and staff, for our team, the challenge was we really needed to put it into 3 different buckets of our work so that we could stay focused. Because I don't know about you, lots of things have been coming our way for great suggestions and quick fixes, and it just was coming fast and furious. So for us, we needed to make sure that we were going slow, but really being focused on the work at hand and what we could accomplish as a team. So the way that we organized our work this summer was based on the Wisconsin Safety and Security Coordinators Association. There is a school assessment that they have been sharing across the state, and you're actually assessing schools on the 3 buckets of work. Human action, culture, and climate is a big thing. They say about 80% of school safety is around that type of human action work. So we thought that was a great bucket to get focused on. The second was infrastructure, and you'll see classroom door locks, secured entrances, perimeter monitoring, and access control, and also then our technology piece, mass notification phone system, including our communication plan, and video cameras. So those 3 big buckets of work is what we've been focusing on and planning for the summer and going into the fall. Now we want to just share with you 2 slides. One is our safety team progress, where we've been since the spring, going into the summer, and then into the fall. While not everything is addressed in this slide, there is an accompanying memo that you received that talks about other things in detail, so that during the time for questions and answers, feel free to ask us questions about that as well. But there is quite a bit of work that has been going on cross-functionally across central office and within our schools that we just could not put on one slide. So I'll just start with the training need, because for us is to make sure that we are consistent across our school district. That has been very important to me, to make sure that no matter what school you are in, it is consistently applied with the training that we're putting forth. So the first one in the spring was really making sure that we were sound in our practice around visitors policy and in all our schools. So secretaries, principals, and main first contacts in buildings, we had to put in place a visitor, reminding people of visitor procedures and signage. The second is mandatory reporting. That was a big one. We needed to make sure that all staff were trained on mandatory reporting on threats of school violence, and that was new to us, and we knew that that was a priority for us, for people to understand, staff and parents and students to understand that requirement. We also wanted to make sure that all schools took the time at Welcome Back to review their emergency procedures. Those 2 things were front and center for us. And it was a requirement to all principals make sure that they made that time for their staff. In the fall, again, when school started, it was mandatory reporting, continually training. We started with MSCR. School secretaries, we branched off to SSAs and EROs, making sure that everybody was on the same page around mandatory reporting. And again, the emergency procedure. Yes.
I'll ask this later, but you can do it now. The mandatory reporting clause in that law was really troublesome and worrisome, because it could be abused. So it's nice that you're giving training, but can we see what are the guidelines you're giving them? What are they creating protocols? What can someone legitimately call for, and how subjective is it?
And we'll address that during the, if you don't mind, if I can talk about it at the end, we can actually go a little bit more in depth on that, because I think others will have some additional questions around that. And then we went into the next is our protocols. We knew that because of the safety plans that needed to be submitted by January 1st of 2019, we needed to review and strengthen our active threat protocols. We knew that those needed some strengthening. And so then we also knew by fall we needed to adopt or improve our active threat protocols that we will talk about later in November. We knew that also from spring to fall, we needed to continue to plan around safety, school safety assessments and school safety plans, and also staff training for the 18-19 school year. I just want to let the board know that with the new passing of the Act 143 with Department of Justice, we were receiving things in real time from the Department of Justice with very little guidance on how to do the school assessments and school safety plans. We knew that we had to do them, but there wasn't much of a model that was out there. And we have been working extremely hard with other school districts in Dane County, the state, and other organizations and MPD to actually put together a comprehensive plan that is really useful, and not just because the law says we need to, but because it's actually going to do well for our school. So planning is critical for us. And then, Chad, you want to talk a little bit about the facilities and the funding?
Yeah, I think the facilities and the funding basically go hand in hand. So as Karen referenced before, we primarily had worked on 3 pretty big grants in the spring of 2018, and we were happy that we received all 3. Ended up being about $2.8 million in funding to help assist with some of these upgrades. So that was obviously good news. In addition to that, we had budget approval in late June to get going on improvements related to infrastructure, both interior and exterior door upgrades and additional cameras. And upon receiving the approval for that funding, got right to work right away in July. We had a goal of trying to get essentially a proof of concept off the ground at Lakeview that we were going to send for your approval in September, and opened the bids in early September, and had 1 bid respondent to what we ended up sending out to bid, and had to go back and redesign what we were looking at. And at that time, to send La Follette and Lakeview up for bid, which we open up here in just a couple weeks, and we'll have something on the consent at the end of November, and hopefully immediately begin work at those 2 sites. Once that's happened, and we've essentially proven a model that we believe will stay on budget and serve our schools, we will get right to work on essentially what's on that next page. So big ideas there that we had funding at kind of the middle of the summer, and got immediately to work, and we're going to try to get, bless you, get 2 projects in front of you here very shortly and get right to work, and then we'll have a very busy second half of the school year in summer.
Okay, so now we're going to go into where we're moving forward. So it seems that we are moving forward fast. So we want to make sure that we have things in place to not only going into second semester, but also looking forward to the start of the school year in August. So I'm thinking already, what do we need to have in place so that others, our school staff and principals, have what they need to start off a successful school year next year as well. So for training, our focus, along with other things that we're doing, but the training, trauma-informed practices is up and running with our schools and school principals around their plan. It is a Department of Justice requirement based on the first DOJ grant that we received, that all staff receive a 3-hour trauma-informed practice. It's a good thing. So letting you know that's already up and going, and we'll hit our mark by June. So all staff will be trained. That's
Can we get a copy of that?
for sure. Yep, I will. And then we also, so that's winter through spring, so principals have up until the end of second semester to get the trauma-informed practices completed. I know that they will do that for me. And we also are going to provide 2 kinds of trainings. One is the active threat protocol for adults, for the staff. So we're going to be working and planning with them about the revisions to our active threat protocols, so that they feel that they have what they need to actually train students and families going into next year. So we want to make sure that they have a strong base with that. The second piece is the school safety teams, because based on the school safety plan, and we want to get into a regular rhythm, it's important for us to make sure by the end of this school year, identified school safety teams are in place in every school, so that that team can actually launch into the summer reviewing their school safety plan, and going into the school year on a good habit of reviewing their own school assessments and making revisions as needed. So I really want us to get into a consistent cycle of inquiry and revision and planning at the school level, so that I'm not assessing all schools. That's what we're doing right now. So it's time that Karen passes that torch to the schools. So then we also have some additional planning that will need to happen. Obviously, some deep planning around active threat protocols. That's going to need some really good care on how that is rolled out, and also planning to make sure that staff have the time to participate in the training. And again, the school safety teams, I think, are going to be the key piece of the work that is going to get it tied to the school. And it's also part of our school policy, board policy around safety teams. And then second semester facilities work.
Plenty going on. This winter, we are planning on installing those proposed upgrades at Lakeview and La Follette. Then we are immediately, we're going to get to work on this before installation probably begins. Going to start the design work for the remaining 3 comprehensive high schools, and then 5 other elementary and middle schools that have the most outdated door hardware and are in need of the quickest and most timely upgrade. And then, as I mentioned, we round 2 of that, those DOJ grants, we received $1.5 million to overhaul our entire phone system. And that will, the phone system is quite old and antiquated. I remember being a teacher at East High School in 1999 to get my first classroom phone. It's the same phone that is still in that classroom. So we're holding it together, and we have outages that happen almost, it seems like, on a daily basis, and this is definitely a need for the district and very welcome. So we're going to move in the direction of a voice over IP system that will have much more functionality in terms of mass notifications to schools, emergency alerts that can go out to families immediately upon an incident, the ability to have folks like Karen and Joe receive instant notification if there's a 911 call coming from a site right to the classroom in form of a text message or in the form of an email. So we'll get to work designing that. Spring of 2019, I hope to be installing the upgrades at those 8 sites, and then working on designing the rest of the district. Hopefully put the phone project out to bid, and then have a very busy summer of 2019. Just as a point of reference, we'll be touching between phones and door hardware, both inside and out. We'll have 8,000 touch points in our district that we need to put out to competitive bid that require detailed design and very thorough planning to make sure we get it right. So this is a bunch of work, certainly very needed, but there's a lot to do here in a fairly short. This is a pretty aggressive timeline for us to try to get this done. I think that's it. Questions?
And before we go into the questions, just to remind the board that we have another operational work group November 12th, which will walk you through a school safety plan, and we will also share with you, we should be complete by then, as all our schools' safety assessments that we conducted. And so we'll share with you some patterns that we're seeing, areas of strength and areas to strengthen, and that's important to me to share with school principals and also staff to say, here's our schools. It's really fun to actually get out in the schools and see what's going on, and then they want to know what they can do to strengthen. It comes down to human action around the school.
Yeah.
You know, what can we do to improve consistency within our buildings? So
just to be clear, the November board meeting, we will have an opportunity to vote on consent for the initial bid. That's the kind of first action that we have as a board on this topic.
That's right.
Questions?
Did they answer now?
Couple. You want to
And
answer
so-
Dean's first?
Yeah, so let's just address the deans first. So do you want to talk about that, Matt, a little bit on that?
So the first aspect of the mandatory reporting, Act 143, which is a new mandatory reporting requirement, is that we have, last estimate was 95% of our staff are trained the mandatory DPI training, which is pretty amazing given the large staff that we have. In addition, we've given very...
That's in the interest of time.
Oh, sure.
I don't care how many people got it. What are they being told is a legitimate threat to call? Well, how is that being trained up? You don't have to give me the numbers.
Yeah.
Thanks. You know, I know you
words,
might not, but I did send this yesterday in an email.
Serious and imminent
Yeah.
threat that presents a clear and present danger to staff or students in the school. A serious and imminent threat. It's very similar, Dean, if you look at our Code Red procedures, we use the same word, imminent threat. We're talking about an act right now, or an actor, that's capable of causing death or great bodily harm to somebody inside of our school right now. Okay? That is clearly the definition of a threat of school violence, and that is what the DPI module that was created this summer, and I think there's about a dozen questions that you go through when you take it. It takes about 10 minutes, but it does a pretty good job getting to that.
And as a reminder, board members are required to go take it. So we can resend that to you. Yeah,
Yes.
just in
There we
case
go,
you
an email
haven't done
on
it.
Okay.
We'll
Um,
resend it to you.
Yeah, we'll send it to you.
Yeah,
Yep, and then you'll know.
Who's going to administer it? You, Jen?
We want 100%. We want 100% staff.
All right, TJ.
Quickly, yeah, you should take it, Dean, and I think that and it's pretty
That'll
quick.
help. Thank you.
And that'll give you an idea. I just want to say that I share both Dean and Nikki's desire to have review of the training materials so we understand what's going on with that. And in this particular case, we actually take the training, so don't need that one. Secondly, it might be in the most recent update, which I haven't worked my way all the way through, but we've heard a lot about the state grants. The federal grant, the first I recall hearing much about it was reading in the newspaper, so if we can get some more detail on that, not at this time, but respecting Kate's maternal needs. Third thing is on the locks. One of the things is that I spent some time, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I was at a Whitehorse family family meeting, and there was a lot of La Follette people there and a lot of concern about previous communication about when locks would be installed. So I think absolute clarity and very clear, especially the people who are going to be at La Follette tomorrow night, that's really important to talk about the November consent agenda and things like that, because I tried to explain that all to them, and they're like, that's not what we'd heard. So last thing is on slide 9, there's 469,000 for video surveillance improvements. We approved 367 last month, or in August consent agenda, I guess. Will we expect another $102,000, or is that, or did we finish that off?
Yeah, so the initial approval through the consent process was for the actual hardware. So we've purchased that and actually started to install some of that with our in-house trade staff. But running wires through these old buildings is very tedious work and hard for us to handle on an in-house basis.
So no anticipated savings there.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
But what we're trying to do, TJ, is we're trying to, and we did this for the La Follette and the Lakeview bids, we've worked in the wiring that has to be run in some cases for the exterior door monitoring and potentially for upgrades to our wire closets, and also bidding the cameras. So then you're
And
not
the
opening up
phones.
season.
Throw the phones in there too. I mean, if you're going to be going in there to do wiring, let's do it all at once.
So there's other things behind the scenes with the phone, and I'd love to talk to you about it. We're actually through the E-rate that you guys approved earlier this summer to buy new switches for all of our wire closets, 87 of them. They have to be reworked as well. So all of our wire closets have to be set up for our phones in order to actually bid the phone project out. So we've got a lot of balls in the air, and we're doing our best to coordinate the work.
We'll get the synergies you can. I
Yeah,
guess
that's
is-
what we're
is-
trying, yeah. Otherwise, sometimes you're going to pay double. Why open up the ceiling twice to run a wire?
Right.
Yep.
Did you want to add something, Jen?
Unless if there are more board questions, I'll let it go, but I would like to chime in before we close this out, Kate.
I have maybe 3 brief things. One, just to second a request to kind of see the training and perspectives, especially around the active threat training that we will be rolling out to students, and a very clear timeline when we expect all doors and all security cameras, so all the infrastructure essentially to be done. I appreciate we're rolling it out in phases. It makes a lot of sense to do it that way, and I think we have an obligation to be clear when we think we've kind of hit baseline, right? So when we're done, at least with the foundation that we want to have.
I think we will know a lot more when we get through our current design and bid process in terms of how we can ramp up design and what we believe would be available labor to even do this work. So that the bid, we're actually writing in that it's second shift work because we don't want to interrupt instruction and actually kind of create an unsafe environment with doors being unlocked. So that's going to be a limiting factor as well. I'll give you guys updates as soon as I have
I think
them.
it's just, those are important things for us to, I appreciate the phasing, and the end date would be a really critical one for us to know. So just reinforce on those. 2 other ones. One would be, do we have any information on how, and this, you don't have to answer this now, but maybe for a future update, how our new procedures are being followed? So, for example, new visitor or welcome procedures in schools. Do we know anything about how well they are changing practice? And again, I don't expect you to have an answer for that, but at some point it would be good to have some feedback on what that looks like.
Yeah, I can say that.
Let me just add my 3rd point. And and then the last would be around protocols for communication with students, families, community members. I appreciate the VoIP system will give us much more transparency and immediacy. I would love to see what are our protocols for communications with families, to the degree that we have those kind of written down district-wide, and to the degree that technology can help support faster communication with communities, really, and parents. Would love to see what those options are. I know that we've seen a couple of options that other districts have used with texting and more immediate ways of interacting. And I certainly would be very supportive of exploring those things with Madison. Can Karen respond if you have it? Nothing wrong, but just, if you.
Well, I did bring a little, you should go and see this at all schools. This is there, and all secretaries have been reminded at the October training that we provided. It's also part of the school assessment. When my site assessment that I do look at the visitor sign-in log. I look and watch how things are going on, and it has improved since last year. I have to say we don't have visitors sign out. So that, to me, is one that we need to address. I'm already seeing that. It's inconsistent. So we need to get tighter on those protocols. But at least we are across the board consistent in our schools with what's expected for some procedures right now. There's other technology that's out there that other school districts are using about scanning and IDs and things like that
And
we
on
can
the
explore.
communication one, if maybe the next time we visit this topic, if you guys could just share whatever the protocols are right now around communication with parents, and any technology
We can include that
options
into
we're
the
exploring.
school safety plan.
Yep,
Mhm.
in November.
I thought it was a really strange question. But handicapped accessible doors, where you push the button, are those also going to be updated security-wise? Will they still work with the new security? Because right now I know sometimes if you hit the button and then there are new security systems, they don't always work.
Yeah, those will certainly be fully integrated. But during the school day, even at this point, we ask that schools have a single point of entry, and all those are fully accessible, and will continue to be.
TJ, last comment.
Kate's question just reminded me of something real quick, which is that going through the memo from the architects, and I'd become aware lately, particularly at our high schools, and then the question that the person who is in charge of the entry, the person at the welcome window, is already pretty pressured and worked and things like that, and it appears that the new protocols, the new software and things like that will add to what's expected from them, and I think that we're going to have to look seriously at the staffing on that, whether a single person doing that is going to be reasonable, because, and actually I'm friends with one of the people in one of our high schools, and I will tell you that she is feeling very stressed right now, and I can see tasks and burdens being added to that position, so I think that as we go forward with that, we need to know that.
As we close this out, I just wanted to say a little bit on communications. I think there's a whole strand of work here. I want to acknowledge that I think there are some people who are frustrated because back in February, March, we did quite honestly think we could move a lot faster, especially on the locks issue. And timelines do change sometimes, but it was on us to communicate well that timeline change and why it happened. We will be talking about it tomorrow night for sure at that meeting. As a result, to communication-related things, the communications team is working with Karen and this group to make sure that there are regular updates for parents, staff, kind of in our newsletters throughout the year so everyone knows how this work is progressing. When there's no communication, right, like people worry. Yeah, there's not enough oxygen in the room when communication isn't flowing. And when it comes to these kind of emergency messages, at least as an interim step, the communications team has created a message template to deliver more quick email updates and text messages, as well as use of social media. So we are building out some interim steps that we can update you on next month. That's it.
Great, thank you. We appreciate the update. This is obviously an area that we are all eager to see progress, so we appreciate the work. There's a lot of good work going on, so thank you. All right, Kelly. So this discussion is two parts as well, I believe, and so there's a part just for the board members. There's kind of a designated section in the middle for discussion and commentary on the core budget. So if you can hold kind of questions and comments until Kelly's kind of in the middle, that would be good.
Before Kelly dives in, I do want to give a shout out to Mike Berry, who started us on this budget journey, and a shout out to Kelly, who has worked, I think, with Mike Berry very seamlessly these last months on her transition to the Chief Financial Officer. And I'm thrilled to see her sitting here tonight giving us our October budget update. So.
Thanks, Jen. And yes, definitely thanks to Mike, who I'm sure is watching us from home tonight.
You know he is.
It wouldn't be like him not to. Exactly. All right. Well, our goal tonight is to prepare you for a final vote on Monday for our school year 2018-19 budget. So as Kate mentioned, my hope tonight is to walk you through some of the material closing entries that we've had to make between June and October due to adjusting for actual numbers versus estimates, and then updating you on some of the final key budget numbers. I'll probably talk for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then I will pause, open it up for questions. And then after that, I'll invite Deirdre and John up here to join me to talk about some of the more open discussion items. So if that works for you, I'll get started.
Yep.
All right. So sitting in front of you today is a really positive budget, something that I think we can all really be proud of. This budget, in line with our strategic framework, invests in our people with a 4.13% average total compensation increase for our staff. It protects employees from the ever-increasing healthcare costs that we face, and it keeps class size well within our class size policy, something that we can all celebrate. We've also invested in our focus priority areas. Just a few to name would be investing in our Opportunity Youth, our Early College STEM Academy program with the Madison College, and our community school efforts. Finally, this is a strong example of multi-year thinking, long-range planning, in that this budget has a $1.5 million under levy of our revenue authority that will help protect the board's flexibility and ability to make decisions in the upcoming budget years. On top of that, with some late breaking news, we've been able to keep the tax levy down much greater, down to a 3.57% increase than we had anticipated back in June. So all of those coming together is a pretty strong budget that I think we can all be proud of. So moving to some of those reconciliation items that we did have to do in October, I'm on page 3 of the memo, if anyone is following from the memo. I'm just going to update you on those items real quick. I'm happy, like I said, when I take a pause to answer any more detailed questions that you might have. So the first item, following from our safety security team, back in June, we did budget for a $5 million safety and security investment. Since then, following up on some of TJ's questions as well, we've moved 70% of that into Fund 41, leaving 30% in Fund 10. So those would be some big numbers moving around to take note of. TID 32 was an item that we talked about back in June. We didn't have a lot of information yet. At this point, we do know that that TID will close in January, just after the new year, giving us $3.7 million in revenue for that closing TID. So that money will come in and has been budgeted to come in this year. On the expense side of that, we are hoping that we will be able to use that for some of the long-range planning around the alternative strategies that we've been talking about for a year now. We hope to come back to you in the summer with a specific plan, which you will look at, vote on, and tell us if that's the right use of the funding.
Specifically regarding facilities for our alternative.
Correct. So we've talked about Capitol High, and we've also talked about the Olin lease expense over the last year. So that's the zone we're thinking about. Yep. The federal E-rate subsidy, we talked about that back in June too. This is a federal program which we believe the district is eligible for approximately $3 million over a course of 2 years, this year and the following year. So based on our estimates, we believe expenditures of $1.9 million on our technology infrastructure, we will be able to receive $1.6 million back from the federal government. That's a fantastic program. We're very thankful to the feds for supporting that. That will leave us in about $300,000 of expenses out of our technology budget. So that's a good news program. Those entries have been made and budgeted for this year. Next up is our HR system. In last year's budget, we had a priority project of $75,000 to purchase an HR system. We did go to RFP in the spring for the system, and of any of the vendors that qualified, our estimate was too low. We were not able to move forward on the $75,000 expense. After talking to our vendors, we do believe that we need to kind of up the investment. So we have managed to use some October closing entries to put $181,000 additional in the budget to fund the HR system implementation over the next 2 years. You will see more details on that in the consent agenda for the October regular board meeting. Since this money is in the budget, we would be ready to make that selection of a vendor and go ahead and move forward. The timeline on this would be tight because we would like to get moving as soon as we possibly can. Okay. The Dome property, Acacia Ridge. So this is the land on the far west side that we have been talking about for about a year. We have taken $2 million out of fund balance to hold it for the board's decision making in February. Should the board vote to approve this purchase, the money then would be available from those funds. We do know that we owe you more information. Chad's working on that, and we expect to have that ready by January for you. Last but not least, we had 2 estimates on the expense side come in under our expectations. The first one being our 2X charters. We budgeted $1.4 million for the expense of the 2X charter. This is money that DPI withholds from us and then hands over to the 2X charters. That came in at $1.7 million, so that was a $300,000 item that did go back onto the levy. Similar to that, our private school voucher and special education voucher program did go up this year. We had estimated that it would be stable, and in fact it went up 63%, moving from about $600,000 to $900,000. So that was another expense side that we had to make that was reconciled for this budget. Both of these items will be items that we'll need to keep our eye on moving forward into the future, as these are trends kind of working against us in the upcoming budget. The items we were able to reconcile for this year. So that's on the expense side. Good news on kind of the revenue side of the house. what we estimated for loss of equalization aid was 13.5%. And due to our shared costs being lower than expected, we actually had a 10% loss. It's still a loss of equalization aid, of course, but a 10% decrease versus 13.5 gave us about $2 million that we were able to use to reduce the levy for our taxpayers. Coupled with that, the Department of Revenue had as a new aid program, personalized property aid. This was a $1.6 million that we had not included in our June estimates that allows our tax levy to continue to decrease. So a June estimate of 4.57% on the tax levy is now 3.57%. And that is about average when you take out the, kind of a 5-year average of our tax levy. It's right in the middle. So that's looking pretty good for our taxpayers. But to even make it look better, Madison school districts equalized assessed value came at 8.57%, more than double the state's average. We were expecting 3.5%, which was the number that we had the previous May. And so that coming in at 8.5% makes it a much bigger base for our total tax levy to be allocated to. So with a much bigger base, that drops our mill rate down to $11.06, the lowest we've seen in 5 years. Okay? The average taxpayer home value does increase, as it would with any increase in the assessment value, but that mill rate dropping by so much has the effect of actually decreasing, slightly decreasing the taxpayer's bill for the average home value. Okay, so what we're estimating is about $18 decrease for the average home of about $273,000 in the Madison area, tax assessment area. Now what we know is that this is an average, and as all averages do, it kind of brings you to the middle. We do have extremes, probably more this year than any other year. Shorewood Hills is down in property assessments. Fitchburg is kind of right in the middle, and then you have Madison far to the right. So Madison obviously is the largest weight, but there are a very large variance depending on the city you live in, the neighborhood you exist in, and your individual home. So some people will, of course, see tax increases, and some will see even larger decreases than the $18 estimated. So the last kind of just factual point I want to get out there before I open up questions is on fund balance. So if you take some of these adjusting entries in and do the math, we have taken $5 million out of fund balance for the safety and security. If the property on the far west side is purchased, that would be another $2 million out of fund balance. And then we do have some TID 25 carryover that's expected to be paid early this year just because the bills came in a little late, which would be another $1.6 million draw. Add into that our TID 32 money coming in, and what you end up with is a 12.6% fund balance right in the middle of our policy. So that's, I think, great news. If we had none of those entries, we'd be at about a 14.6%, which is the highest end of our policy. So it seems to us to be the right time to be investing in these one-time safety security items, for example, or the land purchase. Fund balance is there for a reason, and sticking at the middle of the policy and using the money kind of wisely for one-time expenses is a strategy that we support. So before I move to the next phase of this discussion, I'll pause and open it up, Kate.
Yeah, so we kind of timed this to talk about everything that Kelly has just discussed, and then some of the more open items that I think have already been raised to talk about second. So if we can kind of discuss the base budget items now. And
Kelly, did you mention anything about where this leaves us with on the under levy in terms of looking forward? Because obviously we have spent, we have huge spending increases this year that we're supporting with this, but that isn't going to be, I'd like to know where we are with the under levy in the future years.
Yep. Yeah, Mary, to your point, all fund expenditures net of interfund transfers are up 7.9%. So to your point, yes, expenditures are up. And the under levy going into June was $2 million. Due to some of these expenses that I just mentioned, we're at 1.5 million under levy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. about 5 or 6 things. I'll try and make them as quick as possible. First off, I double-checked the $18, and it's there, and that's wonderful for the average taxpayer.
You double-checked it?
Well, I double-checked it. I mean, no, I was, because it's kind of shocking to see that, right?
Yeah.
And when I'm shocked, I double-check, and so that's really great news, and it was a good figure to put out there. So thank you on that. Question going forward, kind of in related to Mary's, is do we still anticipate taking the max equalization hit next year, assuming that the system is all the same as it is now, which is a big assumption given what happens in November. But but do we still assume that? Okay.
It's actually a really good point. I think at this assumption right now, it's probably the max loss, which is the negative 15%,
Right.
largely driven, TJ, that 8.75%. Well, really great news this year is going to hurt equalization aid next year.
Right. And in addition, the TID spending and the fund balance spending and the grant, and well, actually the grant stuff's outside of it, but
Correct.
that's. Second thing is or third thing, or whatever it is, just kind of a generalized comment on spending, particularly fund balance money. We have a lot of this directed in this budget towards facilities pieces, and a lot of it directed towards, maybe land or whatever. The fund balance grew unexpectedly last year. We underspent the budget we passed by about $6.6 million. About $3 million of that was underspending in undifferentiated curriculum, which is direct at instructional costs. And I think that as a board, that we budgeted this for instructional costs, and initially last year. And once it goes into fund balance, then all of a sudden we start telling ourselves that this needs to be one-time facilities kind of things. And I don't think that's necessarily true. This was initially supposed to go into our classrooms with teaching and learning. And I think that we need to keep an eye on that for funding teaching and learning in the future, that's where this came from. So that's just kind of a general philosophy thing as we go forward around that. You mentioned the HR software. I'm trying to go from my list to the ones that you've already hit. So that $180,000 in addition to the previously allocated $75,000, so this now looks like a $250,000 project. I think that we're going to get more information on this on the consent agenda next time, so I'll save the questions for then. I think that's everything on my list that was in your first section. So if not, I'll come back to it, I guess.
Any other comments?
Just request for comment for second section.
Yeah,
I'm
maybe just
still
on
on first section.
Yeah, do you have more?
Mm-hmm.
Go for it.
Yeah, and I appreciate, Kelly, all the numbers. I will say that this, and I appreciate you saying this wide variety in the reassessments. So this is all fueled our ability to reduce the mill rate and still see a big increase in our expenditures is additional state money. With Madison property values, about 2/3 of it, or 70%, is reevaluation, reassessments up of existing property. So this falls onto existing property owners. The point I want to make is in looking and diving into those numbers for single-family homes, the burden, the vast majority of that burden in terms of the percentage is on lower valuation homes. Like you mentioned, Shorewood Hills, 0. Highlands, less than 2%. Blackhawk, less than 1%. Hawks Landing, 0%. So they will see the highest value. There's very few with homes on average value of over $500,000 that are seen anywhere near that average. And in fact, they're fairly stable. That's, reflecting the market. I will say I live in a neighborhood where it's maybe the lowest, one of the lowest home values in the city. And I think about the people in my neighborhood. A woman two houses down has been in her house for 34 years. The valuations in my neighborhood are going up 14%. 14%. So if the mill rate stays the same, these are all homes under $150,000. On a $150,000 home, that's like a $400 a year increase. for someone, that's like an extra mortgage payment. So I think we have to consider how this is hitting. So yeah, and I calculated with our decrease in the mill rate, if the city has the same amount of assessment, because that's only half. They don't look at their bill and say, oh, well, the school district did this, but the city did this. That's still over $200 a year for someone who has been in their home for 34 years, is on a fixed income, and, is probably struggling. So I think as we look at additional spending, I'm comfortable. I'm really glad with the additional investments that what we were able to do for an increase for our staff. Certainly there's still some other things maybe that we need to do. But I think we have to think about that this isn't hitting not everyone, as Kelly pointed out, and that in fact the lowest increase in valuations are on the highest homes. And some of the biggest ones, some of these going through, Meadowood is 11%. Northgate is over 10%. These are the lowest areas of the city. And we have to think. I would certainly, I take that into account. Thanks, Mary. Nikki.
That's an excellent point, Mary, and I do have a question. Where exactly do we cut? And those are hard questions. Do we do the minimum on security? Do we do the maximum? Can we afford things like metal detectors? Can we afford things like Wandy? What can we afford? What can't we afford? Because you're right, these are single families, and that's an incredible amount. 14%. I have a friend whose is going up 13%. That's an incredibly important issue. So how do we do that? I would love to.
Well, I think there's, one thing is I'm not looking, the budget, we're just looking at a few different changes here. We've basically passed, we're looking at a few things. I think one thing is also some of these funds that we have from the closing of the TID or things from the general fund are they one-time expenditures?
Okay.
Are they capital expenditures rather than the ongoing operating? Because the other issue is we're going to, I don't think next year will look like this, and I don't think 2 years or 3 years from now, I think these budgets are going to get tough. So I think we should basically look, is it a wise expenditure or not? Does it need to be made?
Thanks, Mary. Maybe to piggyback on your last point, I had two questions, Kelly. The first is, so our revenues are going up 5.27% and our expenditures are going up 7.95%. And so we've gotten two questions about what does the future look like here, and I know you don't know the future any better than the rest of us, but just, 2 months ago, looking forward into next year's budget was going to be tough, and the year after that was going to be extremely tough. Does anything about the moving pieces here change that trajectory from your perspective? Or, just looking at the numbers, we're spending almost 8% and we're earning about 5% more, and those things don't match.
Yeah.
So.
I don't know that any of these current numbers change in our favor for the upcoming years. TJ mentioned the equalization aid. The 8.75% will hit us on equalization aid next year. There's no doubt about that. So that'll be more on the levy, less funding from the state. Our enrollment counts matter. They matter a lot when it comes to our revenue limits and the revenue we can collect. The 2X charters will grow next year. We're going to lose more students to 2X charters next year. I think we know that for a fact. And so that'll be additional revenue affected, but also expenditures that will continue to go out. So I don't think there's anything in the numbers we're seeing today that kind of change some of the previous conversations we've had about next year or the year after.
Okay. So you led straight into my second question, which was, could you speak a little bit about enrollment? The negative 714 in here, is that different than what we expected or not? And then more precisely, this says we are funding 300 students that are attending either a 2X charter or a voucher school.
Yeah.
That's what this budget says.
Right.
And to the tune of $2.7 million about.
When you add it together. So first of all, Andrew puts out a really detailed enrollment report in November, so you'll be getting that. So I'll stay pretty high level. The -17 that you mentioned is our open enrollment number, right?
Yeah.
So it's net. Open enrollment out, open enrollment in.
-700.
The net is that 714 students
And is
left
that-
the district. But that's better than the year before, and the year before was better than the year before. So we lost about 750, give or take a couple last year. So now -714 is better than -750. Okay. And then that's actually a trend over the last couple of years. So Andrew will get you more details on that and a much more detailed report. But in some ways, that's good news, right? That we only lost 714. Knowing that open enrollment is always a big deal, and even 714 wouldn't be who we would want to lose. On the 2X charter side, yeah, I think you were combining them together.
Yep.
So that's about right, about 2.7 million out the door between the vouchers and the 2X charters. 199.7 2X charter students, FTE, because there's a lot of 4K kids in there. So it's not students, that's full-time equivalent of students. That will go up. We know their plans. Their plans are public, so we know that each of these schools are in their first year and they're going to take on the next
No,
the
they're
next
not
year.
public, by the
Not
way.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, they're not. They haven't
not
been
public.
released. I have a public records request that has not been met yet. So, no, they are not public. They call themselves public schools, but they don't have to have the transparency that we have in this room.
True.
Sorry.
Yes. Did I answer your question?
It did. Yeah. All right. You want to keep going?
You want,
Yeah.
we're going to go next section? All right. Can John and Deirdre join me? I'll move on over. All right, so this next set on the agenda is to discuss any of the open discussion items. We had 2 items that were kind of open from our June budget vote, one being the principal pay proposal. We have $170,000 in the June approved budget for the principal pay, but there were a number of board questions that we just didn't have a chance to answer before the June budget vote. So we had agreed that we wouldn't implement the program until we had a chance to come back today and talk about that. So attached to this document was kind of the answers to those questions back in June. Deirdre's here to help answer any of that, and then we'll move to special education after that.
Okay. Hello. Mary's got her hand up here.
I didn't know if you were
You
going
want to
through a
start?
presentation or questions.
I'm just going to, if I could, just kind of lay out a little bit of high-level context. I think I'll probably answer some of the questions that will
Great.
come up from the board, so I'd love to just
Just be brief.
quickly
Deirdre. Just be brief.
quickly
The
get through.
memo is very clear.
Okay. So we put just to remind the board, we put the proposal together based on a primary recommendation around the compensation study. So it was really about better aligning the principal pay to the scale of responsibilities, which also included working to correct any overlap between the principal and AP salaries, and also address the idea of retention and attraction of principals going forward. So currently, the AP and principal schedules are based on school type only, so it's elementary, middle, and high. And with the feedback and the ideas from the principal advisory group, the larger principal group, and the chiefs, we proposed a salary schedule that really had like 3 basic components to it. A base salary component, a school size component, and a complexity component. So all of the base salaries that you'll see in the proposal are slightly higher than the current schedule, and that was intentional. We wanted to be a little bit more competitive with our salary schedule. And then going forward into the future, the COLA is not baked into that base. The COLA would be an additional annual adjustment that would be realized. In addition to that, we had school size component, and that is really to add additional compensation based on the number of students, really looking at the threshold of more than 425 enrolled, and that's really getting at
the level of support and additional staff that would be required. And then finally, the complexity component, which is additional compensation that's based on the complexity of an individual school. And the complexity piece was really managed through the work of Bo and the chiefs, and again, the principals advisory group and the larger principal group. And that's really taking a look at a needs calculator that was very similar to the one that we used with the community schools model. And it was really looking at those specific needs and the ones that were selected being tangible and areas that could require additional support, FTE, and programming. So when you look at the memo, it has some very specific call outs to the needs calculator, and that's really what those are based on. And then just finally to note that school size, when we're adding that additional amount of money, that is meant to go on the base. The complexity is really a bonus, so that is a separate payment that would be paid out. And then with, similar to the old schedules, principals would receive an annual step increase, and that's about an average of 1.5%. And then they would keep their contracted days. So we have principals that have 207-day, 218-day, and 225-day contracts. They would keep those same contracts going forward. And there was some additional discussion around professional development, and we think that's a future consideration, but we currently do not have professional development tied to the annual salary schedule. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Mary?
Yeah, so when you mentioned being more competitive, I'm looking at the chart at the bottom of page 2, which does show the comparable data with Dane County. And so I assume this is after, it does not include the complexity stipend.
Correct.
And what I take away from that is that not only are we more competitive, we're actually like 10% higher. So I'm just wondering, yeah, and to TJ's point on assistant principals, it's 20% or 25% higher.
Yeah, and again,
I'm not getting the picture that says we aren't already competitive.
Yeah, so this is taking into account the new adjustment. So that would be these average salaries.
But we're already like 10,000 higher, and so none of these adjustments are in 10,000. So it says to me we're already higher.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean we are. We want to be competitive. I mean that's the incentive. But when you're looking at the level of complexity, and not complexity, but the size level, that takes into consideration that adjustment. But we did want to be competitive.
But okay, when I think of the word competitive, it means we want to basically pay the same to be competitive. This to me, and this is a question, because if you were to say, well, actually this is Dane County average, and if we look at the schools we really compete with, Middleton, Sun Prairie, Verona, that in fact it's different, or those are different jobs. But to say we want to be more competitive when we're already above the average, I'm not getting the competitive nature. So this chart does not make the case for me that says we need to change this to be more competitive.
Okay, well, and maybe we have different ideas of what competitive is. I mean, I think when we're thinking of competitive, we're wanting to actually lead the way as it relates to the salary schedules. And so we're not necessarily interested in just being at par with the other districts within Madison, but we have a kind of a national competitiveness that we're trying to adhere to as well. So when we're looking at, and we just pulled the Dane County averages, and we look at those salaries, but we also want to be recruiting, and we know that we have to recruit nationally, and so we want to be competitive at a national scale as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Oh, I'll chime in later.
In order to judge this, really need some comparison data to our current structure, and I requested that, and last I checked, I hadn't received it yet, so there's big parts of this that I can't understand without knowing what we're doing now and what's being changed. The second piece is that one of the things that was asked for back in June was more details on the complexity, how the complexity factors go here. It's the exact same information we were given in June. I asked then, how do we weigh complexity? How do the factors weigh? I still don't know. And it's months later. And I actually asked first in February. So I'm kind of...
Yeah, so let me see if I can answer a little bit of that.
I need to study this. I need to see the formula. And clearly you have one, and I don't. And I'm confused about why I don't have that. I'm going to set these aside and say that I can't assess the overall proposal without that. There are two things that were not mentioned in my request that I would like to mention now is, back in June, I talked about our schools that are under 200 students. And how I think that as we increase the pay for the leaders in our schools that are larger and more complex, that we need to have we have small schools that are simple, and that perhaps these people shouldn't be paid at the rates that they're being paid at now. I looked today, we have 8 schools under 250 students. 8 schools. Additionally, if you do an adjustment for 4K, we have 10 schools under 250 students. I can't justify giving these people a raise. I think some of these people are overpaid already. Again, as I said then, we grandfather people who are currently employed, but if you hire somebody for a school that's 150 students, you don't start them out at $96,000 a year, or 102, or whatever this proposal gives. The second thing I want to say is that when we assess the complexity of a school, with AP and without AP makes a difference. If you're in a 450 student school with an AP, it's a heck of a lot easier than being in a 430 school without an AP. One of the biggest things that principals are supposed to be doing is teacher evaluations and educator and E². APs can do that for them. APs are supposed to be instructional leaders. AP are supposed to be putting out fires. APs are doing lots of things. So essentially, if you have an AP in a school with 450 kids, you got to make an adjustment downwards on the principal's schedule because their job just got easier. And so I don't have enough information right now. I'm not going to, I'm going to leave it at that.
So TJ, let me just, because I think at least one of those elements, and I will take the feedback on, because I gave the guidance to have this be at elementary, middle, and high school level to not get into a more delicate discussion. So I appreciate the feedback.
On the current structures?
But just, yeah. So,
okay.
Maybe if I could jump in since I'm talking anyways, yeah. I would agree that I think some thoughtfulness around particularly our small schools is needed, not just for current small schools, but as we explore more alternative settings and programs, this is administration or leadership in small programs is going to continue to be a relevant thing. And I think certainly I've heard a lot of feedback that we could use more alternative settings, but more settings gets expensive, especially when they're small. So I would certainly appreciate a little bit there. My only other piece of feedback here is that my biggest takeaway was that we maybe should think about middle school pay as a different thing, right? Like that. My takeaway from the chart was our middle school folks maybe are not as highly compensated as the complexity of that age group would warrant, but that's point neither here nor there. So.
Yeah, and just one takeaway, at least for me, is even potentially the consideration of an extra small, if small is not really where we're looking at, if that's not really getting at kind of TJ's comment. I think the other thing that's important to note, and it's potentially a budget discussion item for this year, there has been discussion specifically about the APs and how they're allocated across schools. And so that may actually get at some of what it is that you're talking about. We have an arbitrary kind of way of allocating those now, and we have been digging into kind of using a similar needs assessment that says what schools do require APs, and at least in our opinion, we're not certain that it's an arbitrary flat number that says this is what would require an AP, but we actually want to dig in and understand also from a complexity standpoint what schools need to have APs. In addition to that, the question was raised just even at the high school level, in looking at the high schools across, is it appropriate for us to say 4 APs at every high school, right? So those are the beginning conversations around this AP discussion that we've been having, and is potential for a future budget discussion.
And let's throw deans in the mix too, because they function as semi-APs in places, and so let's get that all worked out. That'd be great. That'd be a real positive thing.
Yeah. Let me follow up. I was curious to know also how many schools have deans. They all got me, but
I was waiting for it. I was waiting for it.
There's guys called deans that work at our schools,
and women,
and generic guys and gals that work at. So yeah, I'd like to see what that in the mix as well.
Any other feedback on this point? So what do we need to move forward for this budget, guys? You tell us.
I mean, it's still a placeholder in the budget. I mean, what gets paused is until we work out the details, we can't execute on the strategy. So the money, it sits there. And what I'm hearing is we need to do a little more work on this before we can move forward on the strategy, which is perfectly fine. And we owe you some more detail and analysis, comparables, and I'll just say that the principal job in Madison is different from the surrounding districts. I mean, it just is. Not only are our schools generally more complex, take away some of the additional layers outlined in this memo, but we, with your guidance, have a very aggressive change agenda underway, which isn't necessarily the same as some other Dane County school districts. I want to acknowledge that and just hold that in your mind as we think about how we attract and retain principals here. Yeah. But we owe you more money.
More money.
Information.
We'll take that
You can
too.
do that too, Jen.
Can I suggest that if it's fortunate to have this ready by Monday, let's not try to force it.
No, that's not what I'm
I guess that's
No.
that. I mean that's.
I think
and I just want to
hope-
make sure we were on
yeah.
the same page as that.
Yep.
That let's we've got the placeholder. The placeholder's in the budget. It's not coming out.
That's my recommendation.
Okay. So that
Yep.
I just wanted to make clarity around that.
Yep. Thank you for that.
Actually, I was stretching on that one.
All right, keep going.
Thank you, Deirdre. All right, next up is the Special Education IDEA update. As a reminder, the reason why this is out there is there were some open questions back in the June budget. We believe we've answered a lot of those questions. We did send an additional email today, possibly around 3 o'clock, TJ, with I think your last round of questions on this. So John is here to answer any additional questions you might have. John, I don't know if you have a couple words to say.
No, I want to be respectful of time. You pretty much addressed what I was going to say in the opening, so fire away, I guess.
Go for it.
Okay. First thing, I'm respecting all of your work, your time. You've done it well. So please do not take anything I'm not now going to state as disrespect, because I do not mean it as such. But how many special ed teachers did you meet with before it decided that the $1 million wasn't to be used?
You're talking to me?
Yes.
Okay, so I think it can be partially explained with the materials I sent, and I don't know if you've had a chance to review those. Okay, so from February 22nd to June 15th, that's like our budget development and kind of the initial reconciliation process. We met with principals and school staff and allocated an additional 3.7 special ed assistants and an additional teacher to schools.
And you met with staff, that includes teachers, only administrative?
Yeah, maybe I should explain our process. When we're talking about allocation adjustments,
Yes.
we're generally speaking about the assistant director and sometimes myself meeting with the principal, the program support teacher, and the school special ed team. So there's potentially at a high school, it wouldn't be with everyone, but there's a special ed leadership team that is a part of every school. And so that is our general process. So when we're meeting with administrators, school staff on adjustments, it's with their special ed leadership team. So I can't really quantify a precise number of teachers that we met with. That's just not data that I keep.
How many special ed teachers are on those, the special ed leadership team? Does that include special ed teachers or just admin?
No, it does include special ed teachers.
Second question is, I know you said we reached our allotment for 100% and the funding wasn't needed, yet suspensions for behavior went up on the disabled, especially in-school suspensions. And I'm just curious how, if we were adequately funded, how that happened. I know you're not Nostradamus and you run a good program, but I'm just curious of how that happens and if we can fix the funding so that doesn't happen again.
Here's the way I would address that. When we were in the October board meeting of last year, there was the perception that additional resources were needed, and the board generously allocated an additional $1 million. But really, to get to the $1 million, we were going to spend $650,000 of our already planned for IDEA flow-through. And so you can see on one of the attachments here that we had already made 38 different adjustments prior to that time. And then following that board meeting, we made another 21 adjustments. And the fact is, we did not get any more requests for additional resources. Once you make it to February, March, you're generally speaking not getting many additional requests for additional resources. If we did get resource requests in April, May, and the early part of June, those were typically, they were all met through our time-limited SEA request system. So I included a graph of that which maps out month by month, elementary, middle, and high school, and then a combined, just to give you a sense of volume. I also did it year by year for the past 5 years, just to give you a sense of the trends that we see. So, my interpretation of that meeting was not just to, give out $1 million without a specific and tangible need. So we actually took each request individual one by one. We met with the administrator, we met with the site-based team, we figured out what is it that you actually need to ensure that the IP minutes were being met in environments and so forth. And that's the information that we acted on. You can see they're not all the same adjustments. They're teacher, they're SEA. I mean, they're really site specific as to what they needed.
I have two more questions, TJ, and then I promise.
That's got. I'm waiting for Kate.
My last two questions are: how many parents did you meet with regarding this issue over the $1 billion? How many teachers did you, not teachers, excuse me, I misspoke my own question. Withdraw. How many parents did you speak to regarding this?
I have a parent advisory that I meet with multiple times a year, and yes, there was some conversation on this, but I guess my interpretation would be that it was an update, that the board generously approved the authorization of another $1 million, but it's really, I don't see that as something that I would meet with a parent to discuss resources for a particular school. Parents very often communicate with me to say, hey, I think something is amiss. My son or daughter's program isn't being implemented. I think there may be a resource issue. That immediately generates a meeting at the school, and we analyze whether or not that's in fact the case. So yes, I met with parents, but it would not have been individual one-on-one about resources.
And my last question, did you consider telling the board on the $1 million that it wasn't going to be used? Because optically, I know you respect us. I know you respect the board. But optically, by telling us, it almost looks like our vote didn't matter, that it didn't count because it wasn't used. Is there a way to avoid that in the future?
I think so, sure. I mean, I guess it was not clear that there was to be a month-by-month report.
There was a required report, and there was no report given with the excuse that no money was spent, therefore there was no need to report.
And I've acknowledged with the board that that we should have provided some information no matter what. So agreed. And we will take that feedback, not just from Nikki, but from everyone here.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Okay, TJ.
I want to move forward, and I keep finding myself wanting to go over ground that we've gone over, and I'm going to really try to avoid that to the extent I can. There's a lot of things in the materials that were given that I really would like to understand better, but in some ways that's in the past, and so I might follow up with some emails. Both the initial amendment and then the context for this came from ongoing concerns that the education of our special education, of our students and the experiences of our special education staff are being negatively impacted by the way we're staffing around it. And I think that, some of the things that in the past is that the philosophy around adding $1 million to the carryover in IDEA, I'm not clearly clear on what that means, but there is clearly available funding through IDEA through the $1 million that was not used, and it appears to be not used because, to quote John, specific and tangible needs were not there that could be met by increased staffing. And I beg to differ. I beg to differ that the education of our students, and I would rather rephrase it as rather than specific and tangible needs, but the educational experiences of our students would be enhanced by increased staffing in special education. And I will believe that at our current level of staffing, which actually increased this year, and that's good to see. And actually, let me just pause a little bit about going forward. Number one, the transition program, applause on that. Number two, front-loading the staffing, applause on that. Those are both really, really positive things. So I'm trying to go forward. But I will believe that, and I will continue to believe that until I stop hearing from parents, until I stop looking at, Nikki talked about discipline reports, you can look at test scores, you can look at number of kids graduating from IEPs and not from credits. And I believe that increased professional staff with these students would improve their experiences. And I will believe that, and apparently that does not qualify as a specific and tangible need in your mind, and I don't even know what to say about that. The second piece that I believe and will continue to believe is that we have a crisis in cross-categorical teacher attrition and difficulty in hiring. And I will tell you that the pressure on those people would be lower if they had more SEAs, smaller caseloads, less, and more supports. And that is how we would get rid of attrition. And this attrition is I mean, this is a crisis in our schools. And if you don't believe that that is a specific and tangible need, then I don't know what to say. I mean, I really don't know what to say. Now, we will have, and I'll say going forward, we're going to have a report from ERS, and I think ERS were the absolute worst people we could have hired to do that report. But we're going to have that report, and we're going to have a big discussion around that report, around what specific and tangible needs are, and how we staff our schools with special education. Going forward, in the context of the budget vote we have next week, it's clear the resources are there. There's no need to do amendment around that. But this conversation's got to continue. So that's what I have to say.
Okay, yeah, well, piggybacking a little bit on TJ is the discussions we've had, not just recently, but over the years since I've been on the board, of the 5.5 years, about not feeling that we've got this right yet. Not thinking that you're doing it wrong, but I don't think I still don't think we have it right yet. And this the idea of intangible issues aren't quite there yet. Well, that's what I've been thinking a lot about the last couple months about how we allocate, is that with this particular group, with the special ed group and the wide range of needs that so many of our students present, there's a subjective element that has to be included in how we allocate that cannot, it just cannot be strictly objective. Can't be, you got this many with these kind of IEPs, then you get this amount. I just do not think you'll be able to use that and feel comfortable with it. We'll always end up with this. We'll always end up with people coming to tell us, and it's a whole lineup of them, that their kid, or example after example, of their kids just not getting their needs met. And it just might be that the staff that day couldn't handle it and wasn't up fully speed. So that's where backup would have been helpful. So I don't think when we, a year ago, we weren't just throwing money at this problem. I think what I'd like to give you to start thinking is that this is not clearly an objective, go through the analysis and you get this many. There's a subjective element to it also that can be quantified somehow. And it's just the art part of hiring that maybe we're not paying enough attention to in this. So maybe we go through all this, feel comfortable that 13 SEAs are good there, and then, well, we're going to give you 15 just because we feel it. And I'm all right with that. I've hired people on feel. I've done things on feel. It's not just because I felt like it. It's, man, I've learned how to trust my instincts by experience and failure. And by not getting it right yet, I think we can move towards the subjective part of it, build up a more of a subjective part of it, of analyzing what's the right allocation, and don't just trust the objective review. It's not good enough yet.
All right.
So that's the only other piece I think we're missing.
If I could chime in on this, Kate, I do appreciate your trying to look forward, TJ, as opposed to back. I too want to acknowledge the front loading of the staff, the transition work. I mean, we are making good progress.
The transition work is excellent.
Yeah, and we have always acknowledged that there is a formula. It's always going to be imperfect, right? No matter how much better it becomes. And there's always a subjective aspect of this work. I mean, we do know that, and that has been a part of our process as well. And we have a discussion coming up in December where we're going to dive into this allocation process, both the kind of objective formulas as well as the subjective part. And I'm really looking forward to that conversation. We're all ready to make even more improvements in this process, and I think we're all on the same page there.
Yeah, I'm going to sort of withhold most of my comments until we do get that information from the report, because I'm always troubled by the fact that we get a lot of input from staff and the community about being understaffed in this area. We've heard that for years. I think Dean has mentioned that. And but my issue is I just don't. We get understaffed input almost across the board. Every aspect of the school community, we seem to be understaffed. And my issue is, where is the optimum level of staffing? If you do, I don't want to get into professionalism and optimal programming and all those types of things, but we have to know when we have the amount of staff that we should have. We can always add, but at some point you hit diminishing returns. And so I don't know where any of this is. So I'm going to wait till we get the information, and maybe it won't be adequate. I don't know. Maybe it will answer all our questions, but it'd be great to know, what the optimal level of staffing is. Have we been understaffing? I don't know. I know that we've got a lot of input from community and folks to say that we need more and more and more, but we seem to need more across the board, everything we do. It's always a call for more, and we have budget constraints. So I appreciate the fact that we have the consultant work coming in that will shed some light on what optimal staffing is supposed to look like. And I'm going to withhold most of my comments around the staffing until we get that information.
I think James' comments are excellent and important to have, but I just would like to make one clarification. Yes, we do have budgets to meet, but we're bound by federal law, which states that it is to provide a free, appropriate public education, and that based on our maintenance of effort, we cannot spend less than we spent in special ed the previous year. So I think that the board needs to take that into consideration, because that is the current federal law.
Just one last comment on this, because I know we have December to dive in detail, but I do want to flag that this issue of optimal levels, you'll hear more about this in December. I think that's a real challenge. And there are several ways to go about defining what that looks like, and we'll share those different ways of thinking about it, but we haven't maybe found an optimal way of defining optimal yet, but we'll share with you everything we think on that subject.
So maybe just to close this out, I mean, we have an upcoming discussion on allocation models, staffing. I think the last discussion we had on principal pay and deans and APs is relevant there as well. The other piece of this equation, which isn't what's the optimal kind of ratios of which there is probably no answer for, right, is around sources of funds. Can you just talk a little bit about flow-through funds? I'm not familiar with the sources. Is this a grant that we have in perpetuity? Is this something that we have for a few years? What's the...
No, this is every year. This is an annual award to school districts, and it's really considered to offset the additional costs for educating students with disabilities.
And is it something, what happens if we don't spend it? It all carries over no matter what?
Yeah, you actually have 27 months to spend it, and technically, if you don't spend it, it would return back to DPI. But
Please
of course,
tell me we don't
never
leave a dime unspent.
we would never do that.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that it should be clarified, though, that really, very traditionally, we have put every non-aidable cost on flow-through, because when we have special education positions on the local budgets, we get categorical reimbursement. So we get about 26% of the salary and benefits reimbursed by the state for every locally funded position. So we've tended to put non-aidable expenses on flow-through. So sort of we're maximizing our income, so to speak, on our special education programming. So that's why you see curriculum, that's why you see professional development costs, that's why you see clerical costs. There's and that's why I included that information in your budget to say, what are you spending it on? That's pretty much there in big categories. Is there more questions?
About sources just real quick. I just want to kind of heads up, and we haven't met as a legislative group with Rachel recently. Districts around the state have been passing resolutions on special education funding from the state, looking for 90% plus reimbursement. We need to bring one forward for us.
Yeah.
It's
on the list. I've been talking.
Kate, do you want me to draft it? I can.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. I have some other ones that we can talk about.
Yeah, I would love to.
Yeah. Okay,
a lot of
move
people
on.
thinking about it. Nobody's doing it.
Yeah, I have some.
Okay. Contact you by email.
Go for it.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
All right, so we're going to move on. I do understand that there might be two board amendment proposals out there. Gave a high-level summary as I understand them. One on the long-term subs, board amendment TJ put forward to increase the daily sub rate to $201.45 per day. That is estimated to be about $150,000. Deirdre's up here to answer questions, but my understanding is the board maybe just wants to talk.
Yeah, well, I say My proposal was to increase the long-term sub rate to 197.26, which was the original rate that was in the initial budget. And that's what I based my proposal on. And it's not quite, the 201 is the original rate plus the 2 point through whatever. And I just wanted to get back to where the original budget was. Now, I'd go for the 201, but my proposal was for 197.26. And then there's a second source of confusion, which is that I calculated my estimate of my proposal based on a current rate from an email from Ricardo of 181.30. Kelly's memo says the current rate is 186. Now, is that the current rate? 185 point. I don't have them both in front of me. Is that the current? Is that the old current rate plus the 2 point? Okay, all right. So that was the source of confusion there. We're talking $10,000 different on. Well, we're talking. With that one, we're talking $5,000 or $10,000. With the other one, we're talking a difference of about $36,000.
Yeah, I think if we go with your numbers,
the
it's about
math has-
115,000.
Yeah, 115. Call it 115. We can talk about the math. We can talk about the logistics. I'll just talk about why. I think we heard from Mike, and I'm sorry, I'd forgotten your name. Today, I think that we do have a sub that the long-term sub job is qualitatively different than a short-term sub job. Number two is that that the sub pay has been. It used to have longevity. It no longer does and hasn't for some years. And number three is that it used to be relatively in line with our starting teacher pay, and it no longer is. There are good reasons why this was in the initial budget proposal. It's not a lot of money. I think these people are valuable to our community. I think that for $115,000, it's worth it to me. So that's my case. Maybe not as strong as it could be, but it's a late.
I mean, does anybody have any objections here? I think this is a great
No.
idea. My daughter has a long-term sub right now. She's wonderful. I'm very grateful for her.
Is it all right if we just build it into the final
With the
proposal?
115,
Yeah.
my numbers.
Yeah.
Fine.
All right.
That's
Thank you,
good.
TJ.
That's good.
Thank you,
Sorry
TJ.
about the $3.
Thank you, TJ. So the second one was one that we have discussed on and off, and I sent a note about, I think last week. We've discussed it on and off over the last 2 years to bring in a recruiter specifically focused on hiring and supporting and retaining staff of color, in particular African American staff, but I think that's probably something that everybody here at least has discussed. I don't know if there is an appetite to support that in this budget. I think it's about $90,000, $95,000 for a full-time staff person. So I guess would welcome just a steer from this group what to build in.
I would, sorry, I thought I raised my hand. I apologize.
Go for it, Nikki.
No, let me go first, because I raised my hand.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Go ahead, Dean.
Yeah.
All right, Dean.
Only fair.
Do you want this?
Yes. We wanted it the
Wanted
last
it
time
last
we
year
asked.
full-time.
We wanted it full time. Yeah.
And, okay, and this positions in one form or another has been around sometimes and not varying degrees of success, I think.
Not during my tenure.
Yeah, right.
But I
Not
know
with
that there
yours.
was at one point, but that was very much focused on external recruitment based on what I've learned from James and others, and that is not what we
Yeah, so
we
you
want
have a
this.
different plan for this?
Yeah, and Deirdre can
Can
certainly
we see it
speak
again,
to
and
it.
then, because I think I think this is a winning proposal here.
Well, given that we built into the new strategic framework an explicit goal that we're going to hold ourselves accountable for increasing the diversity of staff and a goal around retention of staff, we want to make sure that we're well positioned to deliver on that goal. The HR system that we talked about will certainly help us deliver, so we can better track applicants, engage them along the way, and support them through targeted professional development, the support of an employee full-time, thinking about how to engage staff of color in particular, agreed African-American staff especially, but certainly not exclusively, would be extraordinarily important. yeah, we would appreciate the support. Yeah.
I support it.
And this is a permanent position.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go in the I won't oppose, and just the reason why is that I'd prefer if the HR software had been implemented and was there and we had a better sense of, do we target who's applying, do we target our screening processes, do we target people who we make offers to who don't accept the offers, that there's that whole kind of set of things that we really at this point don't know because we've had inadequate HR analysis due to inadequate software and tracking, and I'd really kind of prefer to define this role and hire based on a better understanding. So I'm not going to oppose, but I wish I knew what we needed better at this point. So that's where I'm at.
That's fair. Okay, Mary, do you have?
No, I was just.
All right, I'm hearing build it into the, I'm hearing.
But I think that's for
Yeah.
staff.
Yeah.
Where it's holding you accountable for the results.
Yeah.
And how you decide to make that
Great.
happen.
So I'm hearing build it into the budget and get us more information at
Yes.
some point in terms of both what has happened in the past as well as duties, et cetera. Is that fair? Okay. Anything else?
You got it. Your turn.
Anything else?
No, thank you very much for your time.
All right.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for most importantly delivering a very strong budget for our schools. So thank you very much. Okay, can I entertain a motion to adjourn?
Entertain a second.
I mean, that's what it comes down to, right?
there?
You know, it's like, are we $20,000 richer? Or are we $500 poorer
You have to sell it.
to get the $20,000? Or you can borrow.